back to TAC Ops. I'm Greg. I'm here with Eric.
Howdy, howdy.
Today we have Bing West. He is an author, Vietnam vet, and former Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Greg.
Do you want to maybe start out telling a little bit about your background, how you got involved in the military, and then so on from there?
Sure. So I was born in 1940. Now, I want to make that clear, 1940, not 1840. And then the war began, World War II. And my dad was the doctor in Dorchester, which is one of the suburbs, part of Boston. And there was my uncles played for the Durkin baseball team. So the entire baseball team volunteered for the Marine Corps at the end of 1941. So then the Marines allowed everyone to stay together. They won't do that anymore because of what happened. But they went to war and they went to Guadalcanal. When they came back from Guadalcanal, now we're talking late 1942, there I am, I'm 2 years old, I'm toddling along, my mom's about to have another baby and her brother's back. So she turned to them and they were going up to the third floor of our house, which was the clubhouse for the baseball team, because they didn't know how to explain to their families what they had done on Guadalcanal. And my mom, not knowing anything about this, of course, she said, well, here's Bing. You take care of him because I'm having another baby. So I was raised, and then she had another baby after that, Boston Irish Catholics. So I was raised from the time I was 2 until about 1947, always going up to the clubhouse at the top with these Marines who were 19, then 20, and 21, 22, going through Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. And by the time they're to Okinawa, I had been in so many bars, because what they do is they'd sneak me down, they'd wrap me in a blanket and sneak me down the back stairs. And then they go off to a bar to go drinking. And they put me up on the top of the bar. And I can still remember it. And they'd be sitting around, then they'd wrap me up and bring me home again. Well, as a result, I knew so much about what, just listening as a child to what they were all saying, that in 1945, both my uncles were platoon commanders on Okinawa, which is a tough battle.
Right.
And my mother was scared to death. And so she said to me, and I was 5 at the time, she said, you have to do something to help your uncles. And she said, I had this blanket I was always sucking on. She was trying to get me to not to. And with that, I threw it out the window and I said, that's for the dirty yellow baskets. And with that, she knew something was happening up in that clubhouse. And so you fast forward, I get out of college and I'm supposed to go to law school and business school. I say goodbye to my parents. I take my suitcase. I go down to South Station in Boston to get on the train. And across the street, it says Marine Corps recruiting. And I walked in with my suitcase, and the captain is sitting behind his desk, and he said, you don't have to be in that much of a rush. And with that, at the age of 21, I joined the United States Marine Corps. And I came home with my suitcase, and my mother took one look at me and said, you joined the Marines, didn't you? So it was in me from the time I was 2.
So that would have been 1959?
Correct. I went in 1960, 61, 62, and then along came Vietnam. So, so I got a chance to see the Marine Corps. I was an infantry officer, and wow, what a war.
Yeah, and so with Vietnam as an infantry officer, I think you were in charge of a mortar team, right? If I'm not mistaken.
I had a mortar platoon, and then I was with the combined action platoon, which was really interesting. For a while, I was with 15 Marines in this remote Vietnamese village with 5,000 villagers and farmers, and they were the 15 Marines were trying to show the farmers how they could defend their village, which consisted of 5 hamlets. And every single night we got into it. And gradually the farmers got better and better. We called them popular forces. That squad was there for, oh wow, well over a year. And I still have the photograph of the 15 who walked in, 7 were killed of the 15. And when I went back in 2001 and I got back to the village, they recognized me. And I turned to my interpreter, who's a wonderful guy, Charlie Benoit, and I said, Charlie, this is amazing. And he said, what? Why is it amazing, Bing? He said, just think, you're a farmer, you have half an acre, and all you do throughout your entire life is pluck out little strands of rice. And for a year of your life, there was excitement, there was danger, and there were these crazy young Americans living among you. Why wouldn't they remember you? And that was really something.
I guess that makes sense. Yeah, if somebody came over and lived with me for a year of my life, I probably wouldn't forget them either. From the other side of the planet.
Well, the interesting thing is that when I was back, we had to go to see the village chief, and it turns out, and the village chief, of course, is, you know, communist. It's a communist country now. And he begins by saying, An, which is older brother, he said, I remember I was the 10-year-old boy in your fort, 10-year-old boy. And I'm looking at him, and he said, now I have 10,000 of the farmers here and their families, where there were only 5,000 when you were here, but we have no more land. He said, so what am I to do? And I looked at him for a moment, and I thought, well, this is kind of strange. And then I said, your side won. And he glared at me and he said, don't give me that. He said, you know, Hanoi doesn't care about us at all. You were here with us. And I thought, wow, you were here with us. And that's how they remembered us. So needless to say, Charlie and I tried to give as much money as we could to them, but it wasn't that. It was the entire connection. You were here with us.
Wow. That's interesting. I would have never have thought that. I always thought it was always kind of a, I can't believe you guys were here type of deal, like we always hear out of Afghanistan, right?
Entirely. And okay, we're jumping ahead, but that is, you know, in my judgment, what you've just said, Eric, is the big difference between the 3 wars that I've spent years on. Okay, so I was in Vietnam for many years, 3 or 4 years. I was in Iraq, and I was in Afghanistan. On those 2 cases, I was there as a correspondent. But there's a vast difference, a huge difference. When we were in Vietnam, and a lot had to do with religion, I think, but the Vietnamese, we slept every night in this village. We slept in the different hooches as we went around, because we didn't want the VC to know where we were on any given night. And you'd be there with the families, and they got to know you, and you got to know the families. That never happened in Iraq, and it never happened in Afghanistan, because the Islamic religion says, well, you can't have a stranger in among your women and your children. So we were never accepted in Iraq and Afghanistan the way we were in Vietnam. And indeed, today, I mean, the Vietnamese are very fond of Americans. I doubt if you're going to find that as overtly in either Iraq or Afghanistan in the future.
Right,
Different cultures.
Yeah. I know we're jumping around a little bit, but what do you make of what was that movie with Mark? I can't think of his last. Oh, The Last Survivor. So it talks about how, I think he was a Navy SEAL who got left behind.
Oh, I was up there. I was in the Korngal. I was where the fight was. I know all the troops up there, blah, blah, blah. The answer is, was he saved by Afghans? The answer is yes, absolutely. Because some of the Marines who have been up there have been very good with some of these villages and remembered it. And when that SEAL all by himself stumbled down, they took care of him. And then one of them went to the Americans and said, we have an American in our village. You have to come and get him before the Taliban do. And that's how he got out. And that was, I have to tell you something, that I really feel all listeners should understand. And let me just put it this way, which is really interesting. A good friend of mine is a fellow by the name of Jim Mattis. He was a general and a Secretary of Defense. But Mattis loves this little story he tells about he went to this prisoner one day because he likes doing that. He likes just talking with the enemy and trying to understand them. And he said to this prisoner, he said, I don't get it. Why are you fighting us? And the prisoner began to talk for a moment and give the usual kind of spiel. And Mattis was nodding his head. And then the prisoner said, what can I do to get a green card? I mean, your head spins. But honestly, the view of Americans around the world is that we are decent, hardworking people, and we want the best for people, and that comes through. I mean, it's you got these crazies, these absolute terrorist nuts, but the average Afghan, the average Iraqi, the average Vietnamese, the average anyone in any other nation, and in the, if you will, I hate to use it this way, but the undeveloped part, tomorrow they'd all be here if they could. And so we do have this kind of problem, I think, with the southern border, but that's not my business. But my business is basically to say, I've been there, I've been on these battlefields for so long. And I can tell you that the decency of Americans when they're soldiers and they're out there, yeah, they're tough guys. And yes, they'll put you 6 feet under if you're the enemy, but they're not mean. They're good guys, and somehow the reputation of America around the world is not the same as you see in the polls, where so many people say, we don't like Americans. That's really not true, no matter where you are, when you're dealing with them one-on-one. And you can take my word for that because I've seen it so many times.
It makes me think of politics here, even
reporters are always looking for the next shipwreck or something, but that's not how we are overall. I mean, I play golf, okay? You go out there and you can kid each other. I mean, somebody will be in favor of President Trump, somebody will be in favor of President-elect Biden, but you can have fun about it. And you're not deadly serious. You're deadly serious when you sort of say, well, that was a terrible shot, and you're my partner. But, you're not deadly serious about the politics. And I don't think the press is doing a good job because it's dividing us, and that's not who Americans are.
No.
Right, I agree.
Yeah, and unfortunately with the media too, I mean, they have to find the clickbait, right? They have to find something that people are going to click on to view and watch, and nobody wants to hear, a heartwarming story necessarily about a couple people getting together and everyone's happy. They want to go to tragedy, right? And to the extremes.
And then they become whack about this thing. What's it called? Woke, where they're saying we're not going to have any history. And I see that, a city in Virginia just did away with the name Thomas Jefferson on one of its high schools. And somebody else said, well, we shouldn't have George Washington. What are we doing? I mean, this is insane. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, they risked everything for us. And to go back and say, well, we're going to apply today's standards to you, we're not going to have any history. The whole thing, I think, has gotten wacko.
Yeah, it's a tough time. I mean, obviously, going back to Vietnam, that was another tough time, right? A lot of political turmoil around the war there. Do you see any similarities between now and then?
I see a big dissimilarity, fortunately. Look, during Vietnam, when I came back, holy smokes. I mean, I was astonished that the way in which student groups who didn't want to fight, okay, they could say they didn't like the war, whatever, but the way they turned on us and the press went along with it. And I'm just going to say it, people like our former Secretary of State, who's now going to be in charge of our environment or something. The kinds of things that he was saying at that time, saying that he had fought in Vietnam and it was all wrong, et cetera. And Jane Fonda going over and saying she wanted to shoot down American aircraft. I mean, the whole thing, the country was in many ways awful. And we're not that way now. When you come back from Afghanistan or something, now people will say, okay, I don't approve of the war, but we need those very few 1% of high school graduates who, for whatever reason, want to be our defenders. And I think it's a better environment today along those lines than it definitely was back in the 1960s. That was a bad time.
So
yeah, you guys are lucky you weren't even around to know it.
No.
No, but I found it interesting. Like you mentioned, you were born in 1940. Now you might have been a little too young then to really remember too much of the war period. But I know, talking with my grandfather, who was born in 1939. He was born and raised in L.A. and they had the big airplane manufacturers there, and they would lay out huge tarps covering it. So if you're flying over, if a Japanese aircraft was flying over or anything, it looked like cornfields. Do you have any memory like that or anything at the time?
I have a funny one about that. Okay, so my uncles are fighting, Marines. They're out there. My aunt Dottie is with me, and she brings me to the beach. So we're on the beach, and I remember I'm about 4 or 5. I still remember it. And this huge blimp comes overhead. This is on Cape Cod in Massachusetts. And that's when we had the submarines, the Nazi submarines were coming awfully close to shore. I mean, it was amazing. Right. And all of a sudden, these tiny little parachutes made out of paper come fluttering down on the beach. And it's the guys in the blimp asking the girls on the beach for dates. Yeah, so human nature will find its way,
Yeah.
Oh man, that's funny.
But I ask you that because Eric and I were kind of born at the end of the Cold War, right? The very end of the Cold War. So we might have been around that age when the Cold War ended. So after Vietnam, then where did you go from there in your career?
Well, I was kind of always interested in national security policy, so I worked for a think tank called the RAND Corporation, and then I was at the Naval War College, but teaching, and this man who was the Secretary of Defense, wonderful guy, Jim Schlesinger, came by one day, and I was coming in from spearfishing, and he looked down, and we chatted for a while, and the next thing I know, he's in this room with the Admiral who's in charge of the War College, and he turns to the Admiral, and he said, "Young man, stand up." Young man, I was 35, so I stood up, and he turned to the Admiral, and he said, "Admiral," he said, "I understand that this young man is a professor here. Now, do you think that a fellow of that age should just be a professor when he could be helping national security down in Washington as my special assistant?" And with that, the Admiral throws me over the side. Boom, you're gone, Bing. He says, "You're right, Mr. Secretary. He should be down in Washington." So boom, we were down in Washington. So I was there working for Jim Schlesinger when Saigon fell, and wow, that was something to see. From the inside, I have to say that Secretary Schlesinger was the stand-up guy. I know everyone admires Secretary of State Kissinger, so do I, and they admire President Ford, but the only one who would stand up for our troops at that time, I mean, it was it was shattering to watch. Everyone is trying to get out of Saigon, and those poor, poor Vietnamese clinging to the skids of our last helicopters, lifting off the embassy. And what are you doing if you're in the United States of America at the top? You run for cover. You don't want to have anything to do with this. Well, we had everything to do with it because we stopped the bombing of the North, and the Congress said, we will no longer bomb regardless of what you do. And that was the green light for the invasion from the North into the South. And then when it fell apart, there's kind of dead silence from Washington, and Jim Schlesinger sent out a letter to all troops and all veterans by himself, the only one who signed it. And he said, your cause is noble, and what you did for your duty and for your country will be remembered in history as having been the right things to do. And ironically, President Ford, a few months later, fired him. And that always stuck with me because Jim Schlesinger stood up for the troops at the end of the Vietnam War.
Wow.
So that was under Ford. Then how did things change? Then obviously after Ford was Carter. So was there a major change there you noticed in policy at the time?
Oh, totally. Look, President Ford was not going to get reelected. Okay, he was a stand-in just because
Nixon.
President Nixon made some mistakes and he was thrown out. Nixon was calculating, and I have to tell you, yeah, he made a mistake with trying to cover up for a pissant burglary, but Nixon did a lot of good for the United States of America. So President Carter came in, but he really didn't have an agenda. And at that point in history, 1975 to 1980, America didn't think much of itself. And both the Soviet Union and China were expanding in different places in the world, and we were on the defensive. We had lost our own morale. And it ended up with the Soviet Union invading Afghanistan under President Carter. And then we tried to get, can you imagine the Iranians, the punk students in Iran seized our embassy, and we did nothing about it. And they held American diplomats for about a year. And then President Reagan won the election. And immediately Iran said, oops, and let the hostages go, because they knew Reagan wasn't going to fool around. And I had the honor of being the Assistant Secretary for International Security for President Reagan. He was so warm, and yet at the same time, he had this core belief that we were so small then in terms of the size of the White House and the administration, that honestly, I would go in with a briefing for him or introducing somebody from another country, and the Secret Service agents would say, well, okay, Bing, what do you got today? Well, you need 15 minutes. And the chief of staff of the White House wouldn't bother coming in with me. There wouldn't be a big retinue of people all clinging to every word. You go in, and there would be the President of the United States, and he would say, okay, Red, because then I had red hair, and he'd say, what do you got? And I'd show him the briefing books, and, the staffs always love doing the briefing books. You're going to be briefing the president. And he'd look at them, and then he'd say, so what's the issue? And then you'd explain the issue, you'd say in a couple of sentences, and then he would take over the conversation and guide it from there. And it was a wonderful time. But gradually, everyone around the world understood this man had a steel spine, and it made such a vast difference. I believe that President Reagan and what he did caused the downfall of the Soviet Union.
Would that be more of the build, just pressure on all sides, build up of the military again,
Right.
everything, or anything in particular? Do you think that drove it more than something else?
I believe, Greg, that what drove it most under President Reagan was moral fiber. He believed America stood for something. It stood for freedom. It would not back down. It would not pick a fight, but don't pick a fight with us. And at the same time, he believed in a free enterprise system. You pay your taxes, but the government doesn't, the government isn't America. The government is necessary, but it's the individual and what the individual does that causes government, not government dispensing things to the individual. And that's what he sincerely believed. And it caught fire in America and it caught fire around the world. And it really shook our opponents, especially the Soviet Union, the Russians. You know, they thought, oh, we're really up against something here. So no, it wasn't just a buildup in the military. It was a buildup in the moral fiber that America believed in America.
And that was a pretty, at least the time you were there too, it was a pretty eventful time. Like the Middle East, a lot of stuff was going on there at the time. Israel invading Lebanon, the Iran-Iraq war, Libya, the Gulf of Sidra incident, obviously Afghanistan and the Soviets. There was a lot going on there, but again, yeah, the U.S. got involved in plenty of them.
Those were the nature of being the most powerful nation in the world. I mean, it's inevitable you're going to have those kinds of things, which brings me to Iraq and Afghanistan. Gradually, as we went along, we, the American people, once the Soviet Union fell, some people said it was the end of history. We're going to have free markets everywhere. We're going to have
Utopia,
democracies everywhere. And it didn't happen that way. But, you know, there was that optimism. And then what came, of course, was 9/11. And in 9/11, from then on, and I have to be careful about this, but I'll try to keep it short. We became a little bit too complacent, and I'll use the word arrogant, but it wasn't quite arrogance. It was extending too much our moral beliefs. And that is President George W. Bush, I believe, is a good man. But what happened when 9/11 occurred was that we said, all right, we're going to destroy Al-Qaeda because they killed 3,000 civilians. Fine. So we're going into Afghanistan because that's where they are. This is now in 2001. Within 3 months, consider this, within 3 months, we had the murderers, Al-Qaeda, trapped in a group of mountains called Tora Bora. Then came a terrible mistake. General Franks, who was in charge of our forces, received a memo and a phone call, et cetera, in the chain of command from Brigadier General Jim Mattis, who had Marines. He had 3,000 Marines and all our special forces in southern Afghanistan. And the proposal was that Mattis wanted to take that group and seal off the mountains and then squeeze Al-Qaeda and destroy them. And instead of doing that, General Franks decided we would not use our Marines, we wouldn't use our special forces, we wouldn't use all the special forces from all these countries under an admiral by the name of Bob Harwood, just waiting to go. Instead, he would use Afghan tribes to take care of an Afghan problem. And in all due respect to General Franks, that was nuts. Because, of course, the Afghan tribes did not go up into Tora Bora, and Al-Qaeda escaped in December of 2001 into Pakistan. Now, then we had two choices. The first choice was now take Mattis and those Marines and those special forces and go get them and finish it. Cross the border. And do you know that the interesting thing is the Congress, the White House, the military, none of them could think of crossing a border. Well, that was nuts. I mean, the Pakistanis were up in the middle of the mountains. They would have said, well, yeah, go ahead and finish them. What do we care? But somehow we became transfixed with this border that none of the Afghans paid any attention to. And so we didn't pursue Al-Qaeda. What then did we do? President Bush said, we owe freedom to the Afghans, and we're going to stay and build them into a nation. And look, I've written several books. I've been over there time after time after time. In all due respect to President Bush, you couldn't take a group of tribes hurtling headlong into the 9th century and make a democratic nation out of them unless you were willing to do what we did in South Korea in 1953, which is to say, we kept from 1953 on in South Korea 60,000, then 50,000, then 30,000 American troops that are still there today.
Yeah.
So we could have nation build Afghanistan if we were willing to stay there until, 2110, another 70 years. But no one, I mean, President Bush said, we're going to do this. And everyone said, okay. No one said to the president, Mr. President, you're making a commitment for a century. And it didn't work.
It almost seems like we're still going after that strategy now. I mean, it's the longest war in U.S. history, right?
Well, that's why I wrote the book. Trying to get to my book. I don't mean to be, pushy, but.
Oh, no, we were going to get to it either way. Perfect segue.
So I was over there so many years in Iraq and then Afghanistan. And I have to say, I think I have a fairly cordial relationship with many of our generals, but some of them intensely dislike me. But I felt that I was old enough. I had been on enough battlefields. I mean, I've been on more battlefields, I think, probably than any correspondent because I'm so old. And at the same time, I was assistant secretary, so I understand the White House. So I kept, this doesn't make any sense to me. I'm out here with 19, 20-year-old Marine soldiers and special forces. They're a little bit older. We're going up talking to these different mullahs and different little villages, and there are 10 to 20,000 of these villages, and saying we're going to help you to become a democratic nation. What are we doing? It made absolutely no sense to me, and so finally I just wrote this book called The Lost Platoon. A novel, but it's not really a novel. I took everything I knew and I put it into one book, and I said, this is The Lost Platoon. And then I tried to set it up so that the reader could understand what for 20 years our soldiers and Marines were doing on the ground, and then connect it back to what the White House was looking at, which was quite different, and then try to explain the motivation of the fundamentalist Taliban, and then how they are connected to Pakistan, because Pakistan is really their sanctuary where their leaders are, and then finally tell the truth about heroin, because 90% of the heroin of the world comes out of southern Afghanistan into Pakistan, into Iran, and then into Russia and Europe. And so I tried to tie these pieces together and say, this was what happened to the last platoon in Afghanistan.
But it's a fictional book, though, right? But it actually is based. It has truths behind it, though, right?
the fiction is that I have a name by John Doe in there, who's somebody else.
Yeah, definitely. I've always found that that's the best way to kind of convey the story because you obviously can't tell. Well, I mean, maybe you can from Vietnam and stuff, but like, especially with like recent operations or you're dealing with like submarines and stuff. That's why Tom Clancy was so great, right? He told a fake story, but he included so many crazy details in there. You know, when you watch The Hunt for Red October, you see a Jane's fighting ships in there, and you're like, I get it. Like this is going to be the movie I want to watch, right? Because it's just so detailed, but it's a fake story, right? And it's based on kind of a story that happened, but that fake story now allows them to tell, you know, what they can without you know, getting in trouble, I guess.
Yeah, you although people do say they in the last platoon they immediately identify who the president is, et cetera. But you're absolutely right, Eric. It has to do with you set something up, you take the characters you know, and then you let them go. I mean, the other interesting thing about writing you know, in fiction, you think you are in charge of those characters, but my wife Betsy will be sitting at dinner sometimes and she'll say, "You're doing it again." I said, "What?" She said, "You're arguing with them. I can tell from the expression on your face." I said, "Arguing with whom?" She said, "Your characters in that book." And right, because I mean, they take on their own lives because they say, "Now wait a minute, Bing, in this situation, this is what I'm going to do." And so, yes, they're real people when you start with them, but when you finish with them, they speak for themselves. Um, Admiral King, who was the chief of naval operations during World War II, after the war, Herman Welk wrote this terrific book called The Caine Mutiny about, everyone's seen Humphrey Bogart with, you know, what were they, not the two marbles, but, you know, he was shaking two things in his hand, two ball bearings.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he was the commander of the Caine. And so a writer said to Admiral King, "Now, Admiral, what do you think about this novel? I mean, you know, a mutiny on an American ship." And King thought for a minute. He said, "Well, I've been in the United States Navy for 40 years. And at one time or another, I've met all those sons of bitches, but not all on the same ship at the same time."
Huh.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's you wrote a really good book about naval warfare, which is, you know, when we originally got in contact, I thought you were just going to be kind of a ground and pound guy, but you actually have studied a little bit about naval warfare, and, you know, mixing in with Afghanistan. Like, what do you think some of the principles that you've learned from the, you know, Vietnam, especially, like how that translated into that book for you?
Well, actually, when I was at the Naval War College, you're right about naval warfare. I spent my time at the request of the Secretary of the Navy doing a study called Sea Plan 2000 about how we had to fight at sea by being on the offensive. And that really shook people up at the time. But President Reagan loved it, and so did the Secretary of the Navy coming in, John Lehman. So we changed a lot of our concepts to say to the Soviets, to say to the Russians, if we get into a war, our nuclear submarines that are super, as you know, Eric, I mean, they can go anywhere. They're coming after you. They're not staying south. They're going after your ports. And that shook them up. My view from Vietnam, from doing Sea Plan 2000 and looking at the Navy, from Iraq and from Afghanistan is very simple. When the general walks in to see the president, whoever that is, they have to say, "Sir,
Nearest
here
carrier.
is our end state. This is how we end at the end of this. And this is what I need to do it. And I am taking the offensive to do this. I'm not fighting defensively." Now that strikes me as being so commonsensical. Yet in Vietnam, we allowed North Vietnam to be a sanctuary. And I said, well, we'll never do that again. And then look what we did in Afghanistan. Even today, Pakistan, that is duplicitous. I mean, Pakistanis have a hard time going to sleep at night because they're not sure where their brains are going to take them, because they're always, concocting some mystery story where they're going to, somehow be the ones who get the job done and nobody else does, and nobody knows what they've done. I mean, they live in this never land, and they haven't done well for their own country. And so they thought they could manipulate Afghanistan, and Pakistan are the ones who have allowed the Taliban to have a sanctuary for 20 years. And for 20 years, we allowed it to happen. I mean, it strikes me as being nuts.
That's where Bin Laden was too, right?
What's that, Greg?
That's eventually where we found Bin Laden as well, right?
Well, yeah, in a place called Abbottabad. Yeah. People have forgotten Abbottabad is named after General Abbott, who was a British general who went in and whacked them. I mean, to this day, I don't understand. I have watched chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff say, we have to learn how to trust the Pakistanis, and they have to learn how to trust us. No, you can't trust Pakistan. They are not our ally. And it just absolutely flabbergasted me, as it flabbergasted me this week to see our chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff go over to the Middle East, to Qatar, to meet with the Taliban, who are our enemy. And our chairman was saying, please stop attacking, meaning give us a chance to get out with a decent interval. What the hell? When our chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff goes anywhere, it should be to turn to the enemy and say, hey, buddy, it's either 6 feet under or you accept these terms. It's not to say, hey, give us a decent interval so we can leave and you win. So I just become disconnected to a certain extent from understanding what is it about what I write in something like The Last Platoon, about what we're doing on the ground where we're sending our troops, and what they're doing in Washington at the top level. There's something really wrong here.
So what do you think the right answer is now, today, on what to do in Afghanistan?
Well, my right answer is very, very simple. We overextended by believing we could ever make Afghanistan into an economically viable democratic nation. Can't be done. Therefore, I believe it was time to get most of our troops out. Now we're down to a handful. But we have one thing, Greg, going for us, and the Taliban know it, and that's called bombing, based on spies and based on fantastic technology. And by that I mean our CIA has done a terrific job of penetrating the Afghan tribes. And there's no way the Taliban can mass without us knowing about it. And what we can do is we can just fall back to, we're going to hang on to a couple of the big cities like Kabul. Taliban have won in the countryside. We're not going to reverse that. But we don't have to allow Al-Qaeda and the Taliban to have a sanctuary where they can plot another 9/11. We just turn around and oh, you're out there and boom, you're gone. And so without being involved in ground combat, except in very special situations with our CIA and special operations, we can avoid Kabul falling apart the way Saigon did and being an embarrassment to us before the world. We can't do more than that, but we can at least keep the enemy, who are the fundamentalists, from having a sanctuary. And we can do that relatively inexpensively compared to everything else we do, with very few casualties. And look, the world's moved on from Afghanistan. It won't be a big story. So
nobody even remembers it anymore.
Right.
Like, I think
So
the
we
average
can,
person doesn't even know a war still is going on in Afghanistan.
exactly, Greg. Exactly. So we can continue to do that. And people can say, well, then what the hell did you do for 20 years? And I would look them right in the eye and say, we made a big policy mistake, but it wasn't fatal. It was just a big mistake. And we move on from it. Look, everyone makes mistakes, but we're still the richest in the most wonderful country in the world.
Right, definitely. And one of the things that Greg and I have always floated with Afghanistan, and I wanted to get your take on it too, is when you have a military that's all the technology's built by a private company, right? At least we have like Raytheon's not a public company. Everything's built by private companies for the military. When you have that setup and you have Afghanistan, right? Afghanistan was a huge war for us after 9/11, and a lot of momentum went into the industry to help support that action. Now, I always think about Electric Boat, right? Or not General Electric, Electric Boat. Like they make submarines, right? And there's only one company that makes submarines, right? Effectively in the United States. And if we just completely cut them off and they say we don't need any more submarines anymore, now what happens to the company, right? Now they have to furlough for years, right?
And you lose the capability.
You lose the skill, just the welders. Just think about the welders alone.
Yes. Yeah.
And you lose that momentum in the industry. We were always talking about Afghanistan, right? So we had a lot of momentum going into the war, and we need, it's nice to have that industry ready, right? One of the things that sucked about World War II is we didn't have the industry tooled, right? And that was a big war, obviously, but we had to retool, a lot of the production in the United States to effectively fight that war, and you don't want to start from complete scratch. Right? Like if we have no Electric Boat to build submarines, now what do we do for the next year? We got to hire people. We got to find funding for all this stuff. We have to get contracts ready. Whereas if we just kind of have the ball rolling, it's a lot easier to react to maybe another situation somewhere else, right? Let's say something pops off in Africa or something pops off in, Eastern Europe. So we've always floated the fact that that's kind of why we want to stay in Afghanistan, is to kind of help the industry stay alive. But I wanted to get your take on that.
Well, and I'll sign off with this. It to me, it is so eminently sensible, but it's not me speaking. Let me go all the way back to, the wonderful Secretary of Defense Schlesinger that I mentioned earlier. He had a way of saying, what am I going to do running the entire Pentagon, 1 million people, $500 billion. He said, simple. He said, I think of what Thomas Jefferson did with Lewis and Clark. He said, we have this fantastic country out there to the west that we know nothing about. So I'm telling you, Mr. Lewis and Mr. Clark, that I want you to take an expedition and go far as you can to this place called the Pacific. And I don't know what you're going to bump into. So Lewis and Clark, with funding from the president, said, okay, we're going into the unknown. No one can predict. So we're going to need people who are good at making wheels for our coaches as we're going. We need people who know how to build a barge. We need people who are good hunters. We need people who are good soldiers. We need people who are good surveyors. We need interpreters, blah, blah, blah. So he said, so Lewis and Clark put together an expedition with a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So in order to have a general purpose expeditionary force that was shoving off into the unknown. And that's what I believe we need as we go forward. I mean, I think basically, Eric, you're absolutely right. We have to keep a balance. We have to have a good defense base. We can't put all our eggs into one kind of basket or another. And we have the resources to do that without really straining the American economy. The fact is, that it is all of the transfer payments that we're making in the United States that is putting the strain, not the Defense Department. So I think you're absolutely right. You have to keep a diversified portfolio because no one can predict the future.
Yeah, that seems to be at least one of the reasons why I feel like we're still over there is because, if you lose that momentum, it could be really rough on us, right? If we don't already have the funding set up, we don't already have, obviously we got to move the troops, right? But at the same time, the Middle East is still relatively closer to, Russia and China than, LA, right? So we don't necessarily want to keep them here if we don't have to. We could keep them kind of forward deployed as much as we can.
Oh, it's faded from the newspapers. Everyone is a volunteer who's in the military. Just don't do anything more drastic than we've done. Don't get involved in this kind of nation building in the future. I think we've all taken that to heart. So this chapter, I think, of our history has pretty much come to a close. And I think we're smart enough to keep a residual force that keeps the other side, the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, off balance and doesn't result in another Saigon. And that's what I tried to do in my book, The Lost Platoon, to indicate all these things as you look at them through the eyes of different characters as it goes on. And with that, I'd like to wish both of you a very Merry Christmas and good holiday season. And I'll be signing off. And I'm not sure that I want to go on another patrol in Afghanistan.
I don't blame you.
All right.
That's the whole reason I joined the Navy, because I didn't want to get shot at.
Stay deep underwater, safe and secure.
I want as far away from the bullets as I can get.
Well, God bless.
All right.
All right. Well, thank
Thanks
you.
for your time.
I appreciate you
Thank
joining
you
us.
for having me on. Thank you.
All right. He had to step off. His time was limited, but Eric, you want to stay on for a little bit?
Yeah, let's hang out. We're just kind of hanging out. We got 10, 20 people in the chat just kind of hanging out. We got our normal DC matches burn.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you guys for the donations. I really appreciate it. It's what we're here for. We're here for the money. We don't care about you guys or the information. It's just for the money.
I don't like Eric at all, but I put up with him for a couple bucks.
I come over here for Tank. I like your dog. That's what I come over here for. I don't
It was
know.
fun, though. It was fun talking to him. It's fun hearing from people with knowledge like that, inside knowledge, right? They've actually lived it, not just someone like me who just guesses all
You're just a
but
nerd.
you know what I mean, though, right?
Right.
Like somebody who's actually been inside and seen it and hear their perspective. And a lot of times, I don't think you really hear perspective he espoused very often, right?
Yeah.
It seems like it's better to fight the Taliban and fight the terrorists there than to fight them back in the U.S. here.
Right.
Have another 9/11. And then the other side will say, well, we got to get out of there. We've been there forever. We got to leave. Time to leave, right?
Well, and
you
that
kind of had like a middle answer there.
right. And, well, I mean, one of the things I've learned kind of like studying World War II lately is like the whole reason we got the CIA and the whole reason we got the FBI, DIA, all is to keep to like have a sense that that's coming, right? So we have like a whole group of CIA operatives in this little area over here to making sure there's no coup that's going to pop up. Or we got the DIA that's listening over here. We got the FBI that tries to stay internal and try to listen inside to make sure there's no like crazy internal coup or something. Who knows, right? But that's the whole point of what they do, right? They're supposed to be forward deployed out there to stop it from coming to us. That's why we have nuclear deterrence, right? We have no diesel submarine force, and we don't need it. Because we have big missiles. Nobody's going to come close to us, right? If you get anywhere near us, we're going to start showing our dick, right? We're going to start showing these big missiles that we could, we're just going to, hey, we got a SSBN that's floating outside your port over here just to make sure you guys don't mess around. So get your shit out of here, away from us, right? So that's why we've never really had that. We have, we always had the Coast Guard, but the Coast Guard's not going to stop a Russian fleet from invading the United States, right?
No. And that's why, like he was talking about, always on the offensive too, right? Fight them over there, not over here.
Keep them 10 steps away so you have 10 steps to defend yourself, right? That's why I have satellites. We could see it all coming, right? At this point, with the CIA, with the combination of the FBI internally and having satellites, I mean, what are the odds that somebody's going to amass something that's going to be able to attack you and you don't see it coming, right? You could at least, adjust your force as you see everybody adjusting their forces, right?
Yeah, it's interesting even looking at, like we have the mapping project of all military sites in the U.S., and there are no surface-to-air missile sites at all in the U.S. set up. None. Whereas if you look through Russia or China or Iran or any other country in the world, pretty much, they have massive numbers. Here, I'll open it up here, of active surface-to-air missile sites all over. It's just an issue that, fortunately, in the U.S. here, we don't have to worry about. Like, I think Egypt, Israel obviously has to deal with it. They have plenty. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find too many of them because the resolution they have is downgraded on purpose. So it's hard to spot, like the Iron Dome sites and everything. But I do have a few Patriot sites here. My lightning fast internet. Again, yeah, the resolution is downgraded so you can barely even see the vehicles there, the individual launchers. But yeah, it was interesting hearing his view on Reagan. I think that was cool. I don't feel like, you don't hear a lot about the Cold War as much as you used to.
Yeah, I was hoping to ask him about war games. I was hoping he was part of that whole story where they're like, "Oh, Reagan, you got to worry about getting hacked and stuff." But I think we determined he was part of all that before the hacking became kind of and before war games came out specifically.
And a bunch of issues too. So he was specifically the Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs. His son, that was another issue I didn't get to bring up. His son Owen West he just resigned like a few months ago, or last year, I think. But he was Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low Intensity Conflict. He sounds like he would be a fun one to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. I think low intensity conflicts kind of, that's kind of like the whole Cold War deal, but and that seems to be where we're going, at least on a big scale. We always have little proxy wars here and there that we're kind of messing around with, but
little wars on a big scale.
Right, but the big scale that we mess with seems to be a Cold War, and now we're starting up kind of a second Cold War. We've all, I think most people agree with is again popping back up. And one of the things I really enjoyed about talking to him too is we don't talk a lot about the ground. We get so tied into technology, and we get so tied into not talking about being on the ground shooting mortars at people.
Yeah, being the grunt. Yep.
Because that's where it ultimately ends, right? We can shoot missiles at each other all day, but you got to invade somehow. Most people aren't going to give up.
Ground, yeah.
Right. You're not going to invade unless they get into the cities. Odds are you're not going to bomb them to death.
No. I think they learned that a few times, like World War II, for example, right? You could bomb the hell out of Berlin all you wanted, or London or whatever, but you have to actually send people in there.
Right, yeah, you definitely got to get in there and scare the people and start shooting at people directly. Because they'll just think that they're not going to get hit by bombs. I think, I mean, World War II, don't get me wrong, was really rough, especially on England, but...
Right. But they had bomb shelters and all that. People are going to survive.
It's like, the United States, they're like, nothing's ever going to happen. And nothing really did. He talks about the blimp flying over. And we had a few shots.
Things, yeah.
Like the Japanese pulled up a diesel submarine that shelled some little spot in LA somewhere, I think. But I mean, that was, I think that was pretty much it. I mean, there was like maybe one or two more things that happened. I think they flew an airplane over us and bombed something in Oregon, I think. But that was it. We never had to worry about anything like that. And that's, he talked about that's why we're so fucking cocky. We've never been really attacked. I mean, 9/11, but that was a terrorist thing. We didn't have China invading Alaska, or sorry, I mean Russia invading Alaska. That'd be really bad if China's invading Alaska. But
well, China does want access up to the Arctic. So
yeah,
that could be their possibility. At the same time, cutting off the U.S.'s ability.
They're just gonna seize Alaska.
The Arctic, yeah.
Oh, you poor guys.
There's a bunch of stuff there. Look at all the stuff we have mapped.
Man, it's surprising how many aircraft we have out there.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God. I always saw these aircraft and I saw AK on the back and I never understood what it was, and I'm like, holy shit.
Kalashnikov variant or something.
Yeah, it's our Russian, technically our Russian aircraft, right? But there's just Air Force bases everywhere. It's got to be half the economy, right? There's not much going on in Alaska.
Yeah.
Fishing and military. It's about the only thing you get.
Before I forget here, Matches Burns Matches Burn asks, do you really need missile defense sites when you have an air force multiple times the size of even Russia to intercept? No, that's the thing. Ground-based air defense is pretty limited. I mean, you're not moving very fast on the ground, and usually you have to set up permanently. Where an airplane, I mean, is flying a few hundred miles an hour, right?
Right.
So you're always on the move. You can quickly fly over an area and have missiles, and also you're launching missiles usually from an altitude and from speed, so they're going to go farther
Right.
than a missile launched from 0 miles per hour right on the ground in the thicker part of the atmosphere.
Right.
My audio's bad.
Yeah, is
Was
your
my
stuff
audio bad
muted?
the whole time? That's not good.
Yeah, we've had a few sound issues today.
Yeah, we have two different mics. Well, we have two of the exact same mic.
Yeah.
But I always have to adjust the settings back and forth when I'm recording my voiceovers for my videos, and then when I do it for the podcast.
Yeah, it just gets kind of janky with all the Bluetooth mics.
Is it bad in terms of?
I think
Quality,
your
or is
sound's
it
coming.
bad?
I think your sound's coming through this.
Okay, an echo.
I think you're just talking to this mic.
Oh,
Like
really?
that. I don't think your mic's coming through.
No, it should be showing up here. It's showing up on here.
Oh, okay. Maybe it is.
No, just recently. Okay, that's good. The good part of it. After the guests left.
Okay. Well, we're playing with it. I don't know. We'll figure it out. There's just so much stuff going on.
Yeah, it's a little confusing because I have to get a program here that will take both of the microphones and make it into one input. That way we can get it into Zencastr, the program we use to communicate with a guest. Because you can't have two mics set up through that Zencastr. You can only have one. So I have to have a separate program that'll actually put the two together.
Yeah, and our mics are still pretty close too. So
Maybe I'm just quieter there. I turned it up a little bit.
but
Echoing.
yeah, it's always nice. And he was talking about he's going to hook us up with another Secretary of Defense, hopefully, that we could talk to
Oh, yeah, that'd
about
be
some
cool.
other stuff. Basically, the NATO side of what he was dealing with. So we can talk about a little bit more the more Russian side of it.
Let me try something real quick. Let me close and then mute that. Okay. Let us know if this is any better.
Yeah, hopefully this will.
Now I'm not using that program anymore since we don't have a guest on.
There you go. Everybody says we'll
Okay.
just switch to it.
Because Stream will allow multiple inputs, but yeah, not that program, unfortunately.
It's just so much stuff we got to do, and every time we do it, there's updates and everything
Yeah,
changes, and the
something
butts.
changes. I don't know how these 15-year-old people can do it. You know, they're playing a video game or whatever, and they got millions of subscribers on YouTube, and they live stream it, and they have no problems at all. Yet here we are. We can't figure it out.
They just ain't got nothing else better to do.
I guess
You know, just sitting at home, mom's home all day, no job, no nothing. It's the best way to do it.
Undo that. Uh-oh.
I don't need to go to college anymore. I'm just gonna make money playing video games.
Huh. Yeah, but then what? You turn 25 and your voice obviously is cracked by then, and no one plays Roblox or whatever the hell it is that they play, making all the millions of views off of, and you have nothing.
Right. I think we just broke the sound, by the way.
Well, yours is skyrocketing. Yours is up into the red. Mine's only into the. Oh man. It's
Well, at least it
real
was good with
echoey
Bing.
now. Do I have anything set up for? No, I only have it for one. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm not an audio engineer.
We need to start paying somebody to do all this audio shit for us.
We could, yeah.
Jeez. I keep buying stuff that I don't need, thinking it'll be better. I got a little soundboard and shit, and I can't even plug it in. I don't even know what to do with it. First world problems, podcast problems, right?
Yeah, if anyone knows how to do this stuff better than we do.
Well, I think we just got too much shit going on. We got people coming in and out. Most people that are streaming are just like kids talking into a camera playing video games.
Yeah.
You know, it's pretty easy to pull that off. We're like a full production crew. Kinda.
Yeah, while interviewing people.
While
trying to
interviewing
come
at the
up
same
with
time.
questions, Yeah, I'm like losing track. I had a whole I had a whole bunch of clips of Vietnam patrols like ready to play while he talked about Vietnam, but then I was trying to think of a question to ask him at the same time, and then completely forgot to play half of them. I only played one of them. Got a couple Afghan patrols here that I played, but
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know anything you want to talk about in particular.
No, not really. I mean, we were going to talk about the launch and stuff. I just want to make sure it sounds good before we start babbling on, though.
Yeah, I've
Can't
switched
fucking
back
hear
now.
anything.
Okay, they say it sounds better.
All right, guys. So if you guys, but yeah, one of the things that I wanted to talk about that I thought was interesting is they launched 4 more nukes from Beret class. Like this would be the eighth set of nukes. I guess they've launched in the past 2 years. Talking to Commissar Whipla, and I think it's interesting because they're not doing any ICBM launches. They're doing like testing of these weird things like the hypersonic missiles and stuff, but they're not doing any ICBM launches. They're just launching a shit ton from the SSBNs. You know, it seems
They're
like
launching hypersonic missiles from the.
no,
hear
they
that.
were launching them in general. I'm just talking about the 8th they shot from the SSBN.
Oh,
Is interesting because they haven't shot any ICBMs, and I feel like they're throwing a lot of their dice into showing off their second strike capability and not what they can do with their ICBMs. I don't know. I'm not much of an ICBM expert, but it just seems to me that it's really odd that they've shot 8 of those and not 1 ground-based nuke.
oh, they have.
Have they?
I think so.
I
Like the
don't-
Topol and. Yeah,
Maybe I
some
missed
footage.
them. Maybe
Advice for a Navy life.
got picked up for pilot. Oh, nice. I've only known one pilot. He was an old boss of mine. He goes, one of the things I hate about it so much is you'd stay up all night drinking with your buddies, and then you got to go fling around a roller coaster all day, trying not to puke all over yourself, and then come home and kind of do your thing, right? You know, it's a life, man. It's a hard one. It's a hard one for a lot of people, you know, because you gotta throw your whole life into it, right? You can't just. It's not a job. You can't just like expect to just quit and go home and kind of do whatever you want, right? I mean, I guess you could if you really wanted to, just smoke a bunch of weed and get fired, right? But I mean, realistically, you can't just like quit and
Yeah, you don't want to be a stoner.
and it yeah, definitely. You don't want to do that. But it's a life because, you know, you don't have a choice, and especially because you don't have a choice, you get to do some of the coolest shit on the planet, you know? Like ride around on a submarine and shooting missiles or you know, flying around in a crazy fighter jet, or maybe not even a fighter jet. Like we were watching the A-10 fly around and we were like, holy cow, this thing looks like it's like a go-kart. I can't believe how nimble this thing is. You know, you'd just be surprised how amazing the technology is. And that's the best part about it. You'll never be able to do anything like that after that.
No.
Never.
Yeah. You'll
Not
be like
anywhere
Eric,
near it.
15 years later, still can't stop talking about that couple year period of your life.
Yeah, you're not going to be flying your Cessna around shooting guns out of it. You know what I mean? Like, as
You're
much
like
as
that old man who's like, you know, back in high school, I was the MVP star quarterback.
Yep.
That's all you talk about the rest of your life.
all you talk about. And it's, I mean, hell, that's fucking why I'm here, right?
That's what I mean, yeah.
I'm basically just an old Al Bundy instead of high school football. It's when I was on submarines. Remember Al Bundy?
The serial killer?
No, no. Am I thinking? Married to
I don't
Children.
know. Am I thinking of the wrong? Oh, that was before my time. So
Married with Children. Yeah, he's just this guy that always rambled on about his high school football career. And that's all he talks about. That was always what he was proud of.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Who am I thinking of?
You're thinking of Ted Bundy.
Ted Bundy.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're missing up your Bundys.
Oh, you know what we have to do real quick?
Oh, Commando
Commando
store.
store.
Yeah.
Online military surplus store. They sell everything. Boots and pants and all sorts of crazy stuff. For the few people who are still listening, go over and check them out. They got a whole bunch of weird stuff on there all the time. Look at this.
What is this?
It's a plush toy. Tank might like it, though. You can-
What
you
in
can
the
tap him on the
hell?
head. You could swing his legs around.
Wow,
Hey. Would you like that?
they stepped right outside the
want
box with that one. What is that for? Like,
I don't know. It's probably some meme or something.
does it have like a camera in it or something? Like, nope. It's
I
just
bet somebody knows this.
nope. It's just
Exists in our realm of the internet. Songbird sings outside your kitchen window. Okay. They always have the strangest stuff.
man.
Slim Fast.
Man, it goes right into Slim Fast kits, right?
Okay. Anyway,
But anyways,
go check them out. Commando Store, you'll get an extra 5% off. Use our coupon code TechOps.
yeah, get your waxy boots.
Get your waxy boots.
Waxy boots.
I might buy a pair of those.
I don't even
boots
know if they're still
sometime.
there. They look so great. Like I want to go walk around in the dirt with short white pants on, like I'm like a old hunter or something. I don't know what to do with waxy boots.
There's a Swiss KS90. Yeah.
But so regardless of nukes.
Back to Al Bundy.
The other thing was a big cyber attack, right? I know you wanted to talk about it a little bit.
Oh yeah, I was gonna ask him, Bing West, if he had any insight. I mean, obviously, like you were mentioning earlier, he was he was before War Games and all that stuff, right?
Right.
There was not a lot of cyber going on at the time back
Right.
in the early '80s, but I think he could have had some perspective on. I mean, the people who did this supposedly got into the Pentagon, the NSA, the Treasury Department, State Department, like everything.
Right.
So I think he could have had some insight into what exactly they might have gotten, or how bad it would be if they were to get what he had access to at the time back in the '80s. That type of thing. But that's bad.
Yeah,
This is a real bad one.
just in general, like my take on it when I was in was it was always a battlefield we didn't really give a shit about.
No.
Like we didn't have to.
You didn't have to on a submarine.
It's like having diesel submarines. We don't have to. Like it's not something we need to put our money into, and at that time we didn't. And we've always left ourselves vulnerable on that battlefield. We literally have nothing. We had nothing. We had the NSA maybe starting up, but even
the
still,
NSA has been around since the '70s.
right. And it's really been focused,
60s
and
or whatever.
it seems like it's been focused more internally than it has externally. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know what the fuck they're doing.
The NSA.
But yeah.
No one knows what the fuck.
Yeah, I mean, I have no
Ever,
idea.
At least since Snowden.
They're obviously not stopping this shit. That's all I can say, right?
Well,
So
the NSA is more offensive anyway. Cyber attacks are always easier being the aggressor, being the on offense.
Right.
Because you could attack somebody. It's like a surprise attack, right?
Right.
You can attack them at any time, anywhere. And as the defender, you have to be on guard 24/7, looking at every single nook and cranny, every single piece of software, every single piece of hardware. You have to look at every employee to make sure the janitor isn't logging on their phone.
Right.
It's a Wi-Fi or whatever. I mean, you have to watch everything. It's almost impossible to completely defend against it.
right.
So, yeah. I mean, the NSA is extremely good at what they do offensively, but defensively, it really comes down to every single person.
Yeah, and anybody
Making sure they're not clicking on any link or anything.
right. Anybody can be a hacker, right? And it's not like you can't have a 12-year-old running around with an AK, but you can have them run around with a keyboard just picking out numbers or whatever, who knows.
Yeah, we talked about that.
I mean, just like
No, we talked about like back in high school, like messing around with.
yeah, I mean that's what kids do.
That's
they're,
what I
they're
did.
just playing with shit, right? And
You want to tell one of your stories on there?
Yeah.
One of the funny.
Oh yeah, well
You're talking about in high school in the library or whatever with the girl.
yeah. So I was hanging out in high school.
PG-13 though.
And I was part of our computer maintenance class, and so we had a few nerds in there that were like super duper into all that crazy Matrix shit, and the Matrix was real popular then,
Oh, yeah.
So he's like, "Hey, I got this new program. All you got to do is take this floppy disk, put it in, upload this file, and then at any time you want, you can hack into that computer with this number and make it do whatever you want." And I'm like, "Shut up." He's like, "No, I'm serious." So he's like, he puts it into my computer that I have in our computer maintenance class, because there's absolutely no protections in 1998 on a computer, right? It's just Windows 98, no defense at all whatsoever. And so he uploads basically a worm to that computer, and he goes over to his, and he just types in the IP address because it's all connected to the network. He just starts making it do shit. He's opening Windows, he's closing Windows, he's typing shit on the desktop. He's making the CD-ROM open up, and I'm like, "This is awesome! You got to teach me how to do this." He's like, "It's real easy. That's all you got to do." So I went into the high school library, and I took it with me. And so I uploaded that worm to all the library computers inside the library. And so I sat in the back corner of the library where I could see all the other monitors, and basically people sitting there and stuff. And this young girl walks in, and she sits at the desk, and it looks like she's trying to do her homework, and you could see her just veer off into like checking her emails and stuff. And I could see everything she's typing on my computer, and she's typing to her boyfriend like, "Oh, I miss you," and all this stuff. And I would delete it and go, "I hate you." And I would like type in stuff like, "Don't talk to me like that." And you could see her like getting really freaked out. Like there's almost like she's so ignorant. Like there's a ghost in there or something, right? And she's just like, "This isn't real." And you can see her shake her head and kind of look around. And I'm giggling to myself, like I'm reading a book or something. And so she just keeps going. And I open up the CD-ROM. And when she sees that CD-ROM open up, she closes it. And I open it again, and she closes it. And I type in I'm going to open it again. And I open it, and she is like, I'm out of here. And she like picks up her stuff. She like turns it off, and she walks out. I was like, okay, I kind of get the whole hacking part. I mean, it was just fun. I mean,
yeah, it's fun to mess around with. Yeah.
I mean, but stupidly, like she could have
Stealing
been
credit
there.
card numbers or anything, but
Yeah, back in the day, we were in high school. Nobody's paying anything on, people aren't using credit cards online or anything. Like, no, I wouldn't have came across anything sensitive. But she could have been like, sending an email to her boyfriend about how she wanted to fuck him or whatever. I could have came across something like that, and it was fucked up. I shouldn't have done that, but I didn't think she was gonna do that, and I don't know. We were stupid, but that's what we did, right? We played around with dumbass shit because it was fun, and I had access to it, and it was free. It's not like I had to pay for it or anything. So
did you play around with keyloggers or anything? We talked about that one.
yeah. So my dad tried to put in some kind of program on our computer that would lock me out from going to like porn websites and all the stuff I'm not supposed to go to. And it was a password. So I just downloaded a keylogger to the computer that would just log everything typed. It didn't matter what it was. It didn't matter. As long as the computer's on, it would log everything.
Yeah.
And sure enough, it showed me the program he pulled up, and you could see his password. And he was a big Ford fan, right? And his password was Chevy. So it's like, I'd have never figured that out. I was sitting here I was trying to like actually crack it. Like, is it Ford? Is it my name? Is it their birthday? Is it their anniversary? I'm just like guessing shit. Yeah. Never could figure out because it's Chevy, right? I never guessed that.
We had I had a thing called, I can't remember the name of it, Bootstrap. I don't know, something like that. But it's just on a USB stick. You plug it into the computer and restart the computer. It'll bypass the password. You get right into any computer that way.
Oh, nice.
I think they fixed it now the way that they locked down Windows 10. And I think they started it with Windows 8. But you used to be able to get into any computer you wanted just by having this USB plugged in and restarting the computer.
Jeez.
And then booting from that USB drive, and then it'll just bypass it.
Right.
So I would play around with that. My mom would, be like, okay, no computer after 10 o'clock at night. I'm like, all right.
Yeah, it feels like that's what the
in.
NSA is doing. They're just finding those little tweaks, and they just keep them. And then they just, if the CIA says, hey, I need to get into this, do you have access to
Pretty much,
here you go. Yeah, we have that.
This was another thing I played around with. So in the very beginning of this video I found on, this is why I made it excuse me. So I made it the thumbnail because he's typing, you see what he's typing in here? Interpreter?
Mm-hmm.
So he's actually he's actually practicing playing around with, let's see, what does it say? So he has an exploit. So he already typed in use exploit. Windows, SMB, MS08. Oh, that's the famous one. MS08 _67. I believe that was for Windows XP. That's an old one. So they must be training because I don't think that works anymore. I think that exploit only worked on.
Look at the list. Look at the list that he has. 1,597 exploits. 458 payloads. That's interesting.
Well, he's using Metasploit. Yeah, you can see it here, Metasploit. So Metasploit was a program you have to have it on a Linux computer, I believe.
Uh-huh.
And that thing does everything for you. It has a list of all the exploits, and it has a list of all the payloads you can use, and then you type in here which one you want to use. So he's telling it to use that exploit. Now he's saying set payload. I thought you normally type in set exploit to that. Maybe it's farther up. So now he's telling it what payload he wants it to use. He's doing a interpreter shell probably. Oh, reverse. What's that say?
Reverse TCP.
TCP, that's right. I don't know what he's typing in there. But yeah, the reverse TCP. So you'll pop open a shell and you could do pretty much all the stuff you were talking about. You can look at the webcam, have the webcam view.
Right.
And if you're really good too, you can actually get the light because the big thing on the webcams is the light will turn on, right?
Right.
So the person knows that the webcam is being used.
Right.
So you can actually get in there and disable that light.
Right.
Depending on the model of webcam. But I like that. He's actually showing the Metasploit. That's pretty cool.
That is pro trial. There's a website if you want to try it.
Yeah.
That's
it looks
funny.
like
They
he's
even
using...
put the link up.
Well, yeah, that comes up every time, I think.
Is this a DVids video?
Yeah.
Oh, DVids. What are you guys doing? You're just sharing secrets.
It looks like he's using Ubuntu.
That's funny.
But I used to mess around with a thing called Kali Linux.
Was this a guy? This is a guy in the uniform, right? This is a military guy, right?
So there he is.
Oh, nice. Just teaching Air Force guys to hack shit, right?
Yeah, real basic stuff. The old MS08 67.
I think people are still interested in like how quantum computing is going to work out when you can just process to hell. You can just go back to old school cracking software. You're just running passwords through. Except with quantum, you can run it so fast as long as the system allows you.
Is there a way to make this bigger so I can really zoom in on that screen? It's not wanting me to do it, is it? No, can't get any bigger than that. Yeah. Well, I've heard, and I don't know enough about it, but with quantum computing, you don't even need quantum computing. You can send a quantum bit, like ahead of the actual information, and the bit can only be used if as soon as it's viewed, it's destroyed. So if it's viewed by anyone other than the thing, the information all gets deleted and it's gone. So you really can't hack into it. So it's only going to go to the person. So if it's destroyed, then it destroys that. But then if it goes to the right computer, it'll be viewed,
right,
and you can see all the information behind it. I don't know enough about that, so I probably shouldn't even be saying it. But
yeah, who knows about fucking quantum computing?
Stuff gets so weird, and even if you learn hacking, like even if you learn a bunch of this stuff, like I was real interested in this stuff 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, then I just kind of lost interest in it, maybe 5 years ago. But all that's outdated now, right? Like you were talking about the thing you were messing around with. It's not useful anymore. We used to use a program called Cain and Abel. Did you ever use that? Or have you heard of that?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Cain and Abel?
Yeah.
Oh, this is fun. I don't know if I should tell on the air, but so I worked at this one place. It was a call center, and I hated it. And I was able to install Cain on there. And anytime I wanted, I could shut the entire office's phone system offline.
Nice.
And the IT guy I was always scared he was going to catch me, but he could never figure it out. So eventually they'd send us all home.
Right.
So anytime I wanted to go home, and I showed some of my friends, and they're like, "Oh man, I want to go home. Greg, can you shut down the phones again?" So I'd load this on, and then just shut down the whole phone system. And they were all scrambling around. They're like, "All right, everyone go home.
Right.
We can't do any more work today."
Oh man.
And then as soon as I disable it, everything would come back online again.
Right.
So as soon as they sent us home, and everything worked again.
Yeah.
But
Well, I think
Never
people are getting a little bit more privy to the fact. I think people are just getting scared. My honest opinion, they don't want North Korea breaking into their shit. A lot of people with Bitcoin don't want their shit stolen. A lot of people, I think, you and I were talking about Bitcoin specifically before the podcast and how it's almost impossible. I won't say it's impossible to hack, but I'm sure there's a way in, but nobody's figured it out yet. But they sure as shit can break into your account and steal your money.
Right.
Just like your bank accounts, And that's the way to do it. You don't want to try to break, the amount of resources that you'd have to pull together to try to figure out how to break a blockchain. It's just easier to just steal people's money out of their bank accounts, or put a fucking virus on there that locks their computer and you got to pay them in Bitcoin to unlock it, right?
Right, yeah.
Like the ransomware, that shit that happened for a long time.
WannaCry and all that.
And a lot of that they tied back to North Korea, right? A lot of that was just.
I think WannaCry went back to North Korea.
Yeah, and Bitcoin, you're fucked, right? If they take it, you're not getting it back. It's like dollar bills. If somebody takes your dollar, you're not going to get your dollar back unless somebody gives you another dollar back, right? That's what's so great about, and so stupid about the credit card companies, is they just have so much money, they just give you money back. They just let people steal shit from them, right? And they just give it back to you. And so that makes it easy for them to steal money from people and just to hack into shit. And it's not just, it's one thing to hack in and steal people's fucking Bitcoin. It's another thing to hack into, the Treasury Department. That's a little bit more crazy. I don't know what you're going to actually do breaking into the Treasury Department, what you would have access to, but I'm sure it's something.
Yeah, I'm sure there's valuable information there.
I mean,
there always is, right? There's something.
It's like mining. It could be it's 99% garbage. People talking about bullshit, but you might find something in there. You just find that little gold nugget that you need. That seems to be what a lot of hacking is in general.
And a lot of it is
resources.
Just getting into it to then pivot into something else too. So you might hack into the Treasury Department, take over some guy's email account, right? Someone high up, and then you send a fake email from him, the Pentagon, and the Pentagon guy is like, "Oh, it's coming from the head of the Treasury Department,"
right? And
he opens it, and then there you go. Now you're in the Pentagon.
Right.
So a lot of it's just pivoting around.
And when I was in, it was early 2000s. So like nobody really gave a shit. You're not really going to be able to hack in, especially on the submarine. We weren't like hardwired into anything at that time. And so nobody gave a shit. Like they were like, "What's your password?" It's password. Like everybody's password was password. Password 123. What's your password? Password capital P. Don't forget the capital. And then nobody gave a shit. And there was nothing that made you change password or nothing like that. And, obviously, just being a torpedo man, I didn't really have access to anything vital. But I have had access to drawings and I had access to this and that. Luckily, we were air gapped from everything. Luckily, the only connections we had was sewage and power, so there was no like hardwired network connections. And I would imagine that the submarines are still like that today. They're not going to get hardwired in when you pull them in. Yeah. But I have no idea. I have no idea what they've been up to for the past 15 years. They're not going to tell me that shit.
Did you see this one too? Speaking of easy passwords, so this hack that happened.
Oh, the SolarWinds.
SolarWinds password for the update server was SolarWinds123.
Yeah. I mean, they hacked the president's fucking
but
Twitter multiple
SolarWinds
times.
is a network they're a security software.
Right.
Like that's the whole purpose. Like these people are supposed to know better than making a simple password. They're the ones telling everyone else not to use simple passwords. And their update server was secured with the password SolarWinds123.
It's funny because they almost seem kind of cocky enough. We're like, nobody's gonna try that.
Yeah.
No, they're gonna guess everything else besides that. And then some fucking 12-year-old's like, I don't know. SolarWinds123. Boom, he's in.
Yeah, and that's everyone too, right? They're like, oh, I got nothing to hide. I don't need to be secure. What are they gonna do?
Well, I think they look at it like you're gonna sit there and type in each password, when it's really a bot that just takes a bunch of metadata and says roll with the passwords.
Or a dictionary attack,
right.
Yeah. You come up with a dictionary of certain words and combinations of them. And then...
Right, and here's the company, right? Here's here's the metadata of all that shit, right? Here's the company, here's where they live, here's where it's based, here's the phone number. And you just kind of roll all that shit in, and eventually, because people don't, they don't want to forget passwords, so they have to tie it to something.
Yeah.
In their head, and it's generally an address,
so it's
something stupid.
A logical series of characters, which then make it easier to guess. Completely random series of numbers and letters,
right?
That would be much more difficult.
To be honest, you can't really shit on them because I guarantee you, 95% of the passwords out there are along that same line. It's tied to an anniversary, a birthday.
Oh yeah.
Some stupid. I'm sure there's a 420 and a 69 in there somewhere, It's just,
and a 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, and a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4.
You remember when so when you made a new account with any website and you had to make it more secure, they're like, okay, you need to also add a number in there.
Right.
So everyone just put 1 at the end of all their passwords.
They put 1 or 69 or 420. That was a big 3, right? Or 1, 2, 3.
Then you need like a special character, so everyone just put an exclamation point at the end of it. So if that's your password, if you have a 1 and an exclamation point at the end of it, hopefully you change it because it's pretty easy to guess. That's what everyone does.
Yeah, nobody's putting like periods or stars on there, right?
Here's back in Alaska. Look, they got the F-22s up there. It's a pretty clear image.
It's a pretty base.
Yeah, but
it looks
I
like
don't want to be cold.
It looks like the top corner was in winter and the bottom left was in summer.
Yeah.
look at the line. Oh my god, just the misery of 6 months. And
so it tells you
this is pretty sweet for 6 months.
This top one was in April, and then the other ones here were in July. Yeah.
Oh wow, 3 months different. Look at that.
So, still, yeah.
Jeez, that's funny. You
could probably see the whole thing in winter. Maybe not.
Wow, such a big Air Force base.
Oh, yeah.
You don't think about much going on in Alaska, but shit, we've put a lot of resources up there, man.
But
could you imagine if we never bought that from Russia? And they're just like hanging out in Canada?
The funny thing is they still complain about it all the time. There's always some hardline guy in Russia, some random guy going, the transaction was not valid or for whatever reason that we should go take it back. But I think you get that.
Oh, it's 200 years deep now. No, they're not buying, or 100 years deep. They're not buying that shit anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need it.
There's going to be a lot of oil under there, too. Especially if global warming continues.
Yeah, I mean, if Alaska warms up.
Real valuable.
Just Alaska's so north. It's just never going to warm up enough to really be. I don't think it's going to warm up enough to be usable.
Yeah.
It's just going to warm up enough where we start getting malaria in Texas. That's all we're going to get.
Yeah, it's not going to be for us. When I lived up in New York, I was always like, if global warming gets bad, it's going to be a lot more pleasant to live here than it is right now.
Yeah.
But I guess now that I live in Texas, I can't say that.
Right.
It's all a bad thing. Anyway, you want to wrap up here?
Yeah, enough babbling on about dumb shit.
Yeah, we're not going anywhere with this.